Okay. Oh, really great to share this Tuesday night with you. Thank you for sharing this Tuesday night with us. It's Tuesday, right?
Yeah.
I know it's a difficult time for folks to schedule things in the evening, so I appreciate any compromises you may have made to be here. And we've got a really great group. I'm excited to introduce our advisors. But before I do that, I want to just acknowledge the greenhouse staff that are with us this evening. I'm going to go in order of who I see on my screen from left to right. So I'm going to start with Justin Van Sagi. He is on our relationship team. Oh, and he put up a cat. Thanks, Justin. He's in Boulder and he's probably cuddling with a cat. Maybe not at your desk, but I'm sure your cats are nearby. And then we've got Jamie to my right, our director of the Young Leaders Program and Whole Community Program, a familiar face to most of you. Jesse Bender is our operations and systems queen. Thank you for helping with all of the troubleshooting and technology, Jesse. Emily Quinlan is in Denver, and she's on our relationship team as well. And then Wendy Guardado, she's in New York City. Thank you, Wendy. She loves kitchens with beautiful views. Anne Marie, she's sitting across from me, my teammate that's running the whole community program, our third phase that we're launching this year for Greenhouse. And then myself, really happy to be meeting all of you that I haven't met, and great to see those that I have. So I'm going to start with introducing our advisors. We are going to start with David. David is a returning advisor. He started last year and just an all-around model businessman, I would say, and community member. David spent over 40 years in the financial services space, wealth management space, and decided to leverage that experience, including time as a CEO, to start his own consulting business. And so he's a consultant for business strategy. He's also a certified coach. And not only is he a certified coach in the professional space, but he's also a coach for Greenhouse, as well as a volunteer for our new scholar selection program. He's a mentor. He's on our North Carolina advisory board. I know Greg's like, whoa, I need to step it up. David, it's really great to have all your involvement. I don't know how you make time for everything, including this. So thank you. And I'm going to start with you answering a couple fun questions for us. If you can share a leadership icon that is inspiring to you, we'll start there. And then I have one more after that.
Yeah, I would say John Maxwell, written a lot of books. Many of you may have heard of him. Famous book, The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, is probably one of the most famous books. Another really good one is Failing Forward, which is interesting because I think some of tonight's topics are around setbacks and moving forward through setbacks. So, that's an interesting topic as well. But yeah, John Maxwell, really great leadership author.
Thank you for sharing those. And all the resources that are shared tonight, we'll share with everybody at the end of the session. And then, David, if you could instantly become an expert in something unrelated to your work, what would it be?
Well, I've always had a passion in music, but I have absolutely no ability to do anything closely related to music. So, probably, that to be able to, play music, I see it as another voice, kind of a way to express yourself, rather than, kind of the dialogue. So I really appreciate people that have that talent and other ways of expressing themselves. So, music.
Nice. Yeah, I think there are some people on here that can relate to that. Feel free to put up a reaction if you play an instrument or a vocalist. Okay, well, let's move on to meeting Greg. Greg is another returning advisor, Greg Vanarek. And last time you joined a session, Greg, you were in Stockholm. So Greg is focused on leadership and professional development. And he was the co-author of 3 influential books and runs a personal development and leadership company. And so he shares his expertise as a former tech startup executive and his passion for leadership and personal development. He shares that expertise through writing, through speaking, and of course, teaching. And speaking of speaking, Greg was a TEDx speaker, or featured as a TEDx speaker, and then also even more exciting, a 2023 Ignite speaker. Greg, you're going to answer the same questions. Who is a leadership icon who you find inspiring?
Hello, Greenhouse scholars, alumni, staff. It's great to be with you. I'm so excited, so honored to be part of this group. And thanks, Jenny and Jamie and crew. Yeah, so I would say a couple actually. One would be Stephen R. Covey. There's actually a lot of Coveys who are influential. There's Stephen R. Covey, Stephen M. R. Covey, the son, there's Sean Covey and others. But Stephen R. Covey is the co-author of The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Can I get a thumbs up if you've read it or you know it? Lots of people. He's an author, an educator, and I love how he bridges the worlds of leadership and personal development, but with a focus on character and principles. And he talks about things like beginning with the end in mind and sharpening the saw, first things first. But I also have to add, more recently, I've been really inspired by Alexei Navalny, the Russian lawyer and advocate who took a courageous stand against corruption over there and imprisoned and poisoned and horribly, and then went back after this horrible, almost death experience, and went back because he was so committed with all the incredible sacrifice. It's just a profound example of moral courage and service in service of something larger than the self. I just find that deeply, deeply moving. Those two, Covey and Navalny, I'd say.
Excellent. I look forward to looking into those recommendations. And then, Greg, if you could instantly become an expert in something unrelated to your work, what would it be for you?
All right. Well, David talked about music, and I'm going to say music, but I would say guitar specifically. I play the guitar and sing. And I love to jam, but I'd love to know more about kind of musical theory and songwriting, and also learning to be better at harmonizing vocally with people. So those are some things that would be really cool.
Excellent. So you're a fan of The Voice?
I like the voice. Yes, it's
The
impressive and
show, The
fun.
Voice.
Yeah.
All right. Next up is Ryan. Ryan is a new advisor for this year and next year. And Ryan, would you agree that your career escalated quickly? I just remember thinking that when you were telling us about your background.
Oh,
Um,
that may be true. I think some of my colleagues would have described a lot of things as escalating quickly when I got involved, but none so favorably as you. So I appreciate that.
oh, I thought it was amazing. So yeah, Ryan's background is in finance and leadership, and he now co-leads an organization focused on tackling the U.S. housing crisis. Ryan is passionate about creating communities that thrive, whether through housing affordability initiatives, sustainable transportation, access to clean water. And he balances all of this fast-paced business life while staying rooted in family service and the vibrant Northeast corridor that I know you really appreciate. Who is your leadership icon that you find inspiring, Ryan?
That would be my father. I was asked this before, and I didn't really think twice before saying it. Now that I thought a lot about it, I think that's still the answer. He runs a small community college in a rural area, but he's also the answer to everyone's question of like, who could possibly help with this? If it's, anything from shoveling a driveway to bailing out a city that did a bad real estate deal and they were upside down to someone who's having an emotional crisis or a family crisis. He's the one who everybody calls, and he's just a humble servant. He's just awesome. So
Oh,
he's a leader from the back, I'd say, and just fantastic example.
well, you're a lucky person to have that as your leadership
Yeah,
icon.
he was also my high school principal, so imagine how cool that was. Not so much for my sister. She got suspended a lot, but it was
Oh,
cool for me.
yeah. And what would you instantly become an expert in something
It would be
unrelated to work?
languages. Like if I could be human, Google Translate. So I love talking to people and very quickly getting to a place of trust, kind of understand what's going on, and if maybe I can help. And I feel like people who English is their second, third, or fourth language. They're doing all the work in the conversations, and that just gets in the way of really getting to a really authentic kind of place of high trust. So I'd love it if I were the one who were able to speak their language and really have a conversation like that. But I'm just not. I don't have the gift, or at least I haven't done enough work at it. And so my Spanish is rusty, even when I spent a lot of time in Guatemala. But I'd love to be an expert.
Feel like you can make that happen, Ryan. Ryan was also a 2024 Summer Symposium speaker. So thank you for
But notice the entire speech was in English. So,
goals. Hashtag goals.
Yeah, goals. There you go.
All right. And finally, our last new advisor is Terrence Cummings. Terrence, he calls himself the Swiss Army knife, the professional Swiss Army knife, or I might have modified that a little bit, but I remember you referring to yourself in some form like that. But you name it, he's done it, from starting companies to building operational systems, and he's very data-driven, very focused on efficiency. But what really drives him is seeing the success stories of individuals overcoming challenges and achieving excellence. Terrence is the Chief Opportunity Officer at Guild, which is a fantastic company. If you haven't heard of it, definitely look it up. Terrence, who is your leadership icon that you find inspiring?
Katharine Graham. She was the CEO of the Washington Post for about 20 years, and one of the reasons that she always pops up for me is her dad owned the Washington Post, and then when he was passing things along, handed the paper over to her husband because, of course, a woman couldn't run a newspaper. And then when her husband died, suddenly they kind of went to her and said, "I guess we're gonna have to sell the paper because you can't run this." And she's like, "I think I'll do just fine." And she ended up running the Washington Post during the most prime years that it had in rebuilding. So you all may know, like, the Watergate scandal, when they broke that, that happened during that time. The Pentagon Papers happened during. She turned the Washington Post into the paper that everyone really got to know and love. And her memoir, Personal History, is one of my favorite books. So I suggest you check that out. I love Katharine Graham's story.
Yeah, I definitely want to check that out. And then what would you want to become an expert in instantly?
Soccer.
Soccer.
If I could play and coach soccer at the highest level, I would do it. No questions asked.
But in the meantime, you're just going to cheer for your son every weekend.
Yeah, and then try and keep up. That's what I do. Just injure myself consistently, and I wish that could stop.
Yeah, that's fast pace. Great. Well, it's really nice to get a little taste of your expertise, everybody, like, or in terms of the advisors, and your interests in leadership and your hobbies. So thank you for sharing all that. Well, let's dive into this topic of ongoing assessment for leadership growth. We want to encourage future leaders to build their leadership foundation with intention. And so we have come up with several intentional questions for everybody to discuss. This is going to be a panel style. So we want to start with having our advisors discuss a number of different questions. We're going to kick the first one over to Ryan. And Ryan, when we think about leading, this can be done in a variety of ways. It's not just black and white. Leading can be done from any seat. It can be presented in a number of scenarios. So how can alumni objectively assess their journey towards their goals while staying realistic and centered on what they need?
And forgive me, you'll have to remind me how much time of an answer I'm supposed to give here. Is it the 30-second or 30-minute version? Somewhere in between?
About 5 minutes.
All right. So I think it really starts with, and if some of you are going to be with me later, I can ask this question, how you're really defining that goal, how you're defining leadership, and how you're defining that goal, right? So if you have a really clear of what your goal is, which most people don't, or if they do, it's a goal that's really going to morph over time, and that's totally fine, like 100% fine. What's less fine is really not having a clear sense of goal. That can lead to just an enormous amount of frustration. But if you have a clear goal, then really asking yourself pretty objectively, maybe asking people around you, people you trust, people who are totally not invested in you or your work, maybe, to get some perspective on the goal itself. Does it feel like it is truly your goal? Is it a goal that sort of those around you or society is kind of put on you, that you're supposed to have this goal? my father's a good example. He loved being a principal, loved being a principal. Like he was a principal for 18 years. It was the greatest job ever, but he was supposed to want to be a superintendent, and then he went and became a superintendent, and he didn't quite hate it, but he was not the happy guy that he was before. It was not his true zen. It was not his true calling. And so he worked quickly to get back to a place where he was really kind of dealing with the kids every day. And if you have a goal that no one foist on you, that you really develop yourself, realistic assessment of that is again internal, not external, is pretty crucial. So when you think about leadership, I know we're going to talk a lot about leadership, and we'll do that some of that in the breakouts. There's like the version of leadership that's on the magazine cover, which is totally unrealistic and mostly fake, right? You know, you read the article and it's like, oh, the CEO gets up at 3 o'clock in the morning and runs a marathon before breakfast every day, and then like, you know, helps children with heart surgery, and then goes to work, and by noon, they've, you know, saved the world. That's ridiculous, but that's kind of the picture that people have of leadership. But leadership can be in this meeting. It can be after this when, you know, someone gives you a call who needs help, and you're there for them, or where you reach out to someone else and you're there for them. Leadership can be in the meeting, how you listened really closely and really intently, better than anyone else who was kind of just trying to measure time until they could speak and interject and show what they had. And then that insight you gained from listening and turning things over in your head came out in something that really helped the group to accelerate your concision, your insight, your humility. That can be true and phenomenal leadership. In the moments of time that I feel like I really was a true leader, I had no title, no portfolio, no one pointing to me and saying you're a leader. It's more just I was part of a team. I was a player coach. I was someone who was there for someone else. And only in retrospect did it feel like leadership. But as you clarify your goal and then assess your progress, I'd say it's the little things and the big things. It's not about what's on your resume. It's not about you know, how others are perceiving you in terms of the career scale or anything else, but it's more about the steps toward those really intrinsic goals. I think it's hugely powerful. It also gives you an enormous amount of confidence, because if you're measuring yourself that way and you're making progress toward that, pretty unstoppable. The confidence comes from a really good place, a really core place, not a place of arrogance. So anyway, that's my quick thought.
Oh, that was great. Just assessing progress, you know, and the steps that you're taking to get to that next larger step is critical. I think it can be really overwhelming to start comparing yourself to what you're seeing, like you started off saying, Ryan, with the unrealistic goals that sometimes are in our faces.
Surprising that
So,
doesn't happen in social media today
yeah.
at all. Yeah.
Yeah. The next question is around intentional leadership. And I'd like to get a few answers on this. The question is, when did you become intentional about your leadership foundation? Greg, do you want to start with this one?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I would say in college, actually, I had the opportunity to be co-captain of the soccer team for a couple of years. And many of you have had experience with being thrown into something, whether it's captain of a sports team or a project, and there's no kind of training manual or job description. It's just kind of assumed that you're going to know what to do, and you have to just kind of figure it out. And we ended up that junior year, my co-captain and I had different approaches. There's a bit of a crisis on the team with the team losing faith in the coach. And I really saw that I kind of knew conceptually that leadership could be difficult, but I had my first visceral experience with it. And then that same year, I had a philosophy professor who challenged me to really to think about big questions in life, the problem of good and evil in the world, and who are you, and what are you going to do with your life? And it really kind of woke me up. I'd always been a good student, but it really kind of caused me kind of he grabbed my heart and caused me to start caring about this in ways that I would characterize now as leading my life and having more clarity around who I am and what I want to do with my life. And later got involved with the nonprofit, did some training around what they called inside first leadership. And so a lot of leadership programs focus on skills, which are obviously important: communication, listening, that Ryan was just talking about, negotiating, planning. But there's also this important foundational aspect of what are your core values? What are your strengths? What are your passions? What is your purpose, or what do you find meaningful? And kind of listening to your life. And that work deeply resonated with me and caused me to kind of go on this journey of kind of self-discovery, and then but not just in terms of philosophical navel gazing, but then applying that in the world and trying things out and pressure testing it and learning about myself and going back in kind of iterative way. And it's actually shaped the way I kind of view leadership today. I kind of view it as leading self first, and then if you do that well, you have the privilege of leading others and maybe leading change in the world, which I know is part of the greenhouse mission. But it all starts with leading yourself well. And that takes a lot of intentionality and humility, because in my experience, a lot of people skip over that, or they say, oh, that's the soft stuff and I want to get into the hard stuff. And they're not properly humble about the importance of that and the depth of that, and how when you do that well, it's incredibly clarifying and grounding, and it can also help you come back to safe harbor when you hit those inevitable crises in your life or the challenges of your life. So those were some formative experiences for me, that where I learned about the importance of a leadership foundation, and then also continually coming back to that and working on yourself as a leader, developing yourself, learning, growing through coaching, mentoring, reading courses, programs like this, etc.
Yeah. Wow. You're lucky that that was a valuable lesson so early, right? And probably unexpected as the co-captain of the soccer team.
Yeah.
Yeah. Terrence, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'll go back to when I was running a, a department in a restaurant. This was going a while back. I was 18 years old, and the people on my team ranged from 15-year-olds that were working for illegal beer money to people that were in their 30s, and they had kids and rent to pay, etc. And I, by trial and error, basically, in running this team, had to get to understand what are the motivations of the different people on the team. Why are they here? Not everyone can hear the same, I'll call it platitudes, like the same things won't work to get folks to want to be in the restaurant. And that's where the intentionality really came for me. Like, how do I get to understand people? Get to understand what makes them tick, get to understand what they care about, get to understand whether this is what they want for their lives or is it not, and do they want something different? And then for me to be able to show up and put that into all the practices that I had, that was thinking about how I scheduled them, thinking about how much money different people might need at different periods of time. When it came closer to the first of the month, like different people needed different shifts. And so just being really intentional about that. And it took a lot of asking questions, listening, a lot of self-reflection, a lot of me, honestly, just falling flat-footed and not doing things particularly well sometimes in order for me to be able to learn what it took to lead. And that's the time when I said, this leadership thing is like real. It seems like it's easy when someone else is the leader and you can see all the things. You're like, oh, why don't you just do this? But then once you're in the seat, I learned myself, and I'm glad that it was just like what your story, Greg. I'm glad it was really early because my learning since then I've been able to compound and build upon it. But that's where I learned that being a leader takes a lot of intentionality, especially when you have a team that is diverse, no matter what that diversity is, and most teams are.
Yeah. What a lesson to be able to apply to every job that you had there on out, right?
Absolutely. I still think my time at the Dirty Bird, it was Red Robin, is where it was. We called it the Dirty Bird. My time there was some of the most influential of my entire career. I've taken so much from that period.
Mm, amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And Ryan, when were you intentional about your leadership foundation?
Active about the stories here. That was pretty, that was awesome. Thanks for sharing those guys. Um, not, there's a bunch of different moments over time, but probably the best example is I took over as CEO, pretty unexpectedly, at least unexpectedly for me, a pretty big organization that was going through a pretty big change, and then I kind of drove bigger change. So we had a lot of, at that time it was probably 50,000 people, and and we were trying to change a lot, like in a hurry. And I had a senior leadership team who was reporting to me, and they were all like twice my age with three times my experience easily. And um, I led by consensus. It was lots of long meetings where we tried to really work issues to the ground, like big issues that impacted a lot of people, like huge, I mean, laying off thousands of people, restructuring everyone's compensation, like all things that we knew were hitting real people. So we wanted to do it well as we possibly could. Um, and then we had a leadership offsite, and it was just my team and me. And I brought my coach. I just had a coach. Someone asked me if I wanted to get a coach, and I had one of those before. So I was, sure, let's see what that's about. Actually, I had a much more arrogant answer than that, but that's the short answer. And the I said, hey guys, I'd like to take a break in the middle of the day here, and you guys get together and talk about me, like what I can do better as a leader. And I'll step out of the room. I figured I'd be out for like 15, 20 minutes. They'd go through the sort of perfunctory exercise. It was like way over an hour that I was out. It was like a hot day, and I went outside to walk around because I thought it'd be brief. And it was like I was exhausted by the time I got back in. I'm sweating, and they sit me down, and it was a full-on intervention. Like it was, they sat me there like, look, we get it. You want kumbaya consensus. You're intimidated by our experience, but you know what? We trust you. So knock it off. Just make a damn decision and we will back you. Like we know you're listening, we know you hear us, we know you understand, we know you're not an arrogant jerk who's just gonna like drop the hammer. Make a decision and go. And it's like, oh, okay. So then the rest of the meeting, we like, okay, what are we gonna do for the next 3 months? And we block and tackled, I went around the room, hear everybody out. I was like, okay, here's the decision, here's what we're doing, here's how we're gonna do it. It's not what you wanted, Greg, but it is what you wanted, Kate. And we're gonna tweak it a little bit. Here's how we're gonna, and they literally stood up and applauded at the end of the day. And I felt like very proud, but also kind of like a little kid who was just kind of toddlers, how to actually be a leader. And it was hugely powerful for me. Like such a turning point in leadership. And they taught me. And these are the people that, theoretically I'm leading, but it was all the leadership that day was totally reversed. And it was massively impactful to my career and to the
Wow.
organization. I think we're just all better for it.
Yeah, having that validation, like you said, was the main turning point, and then you were off to the races. That's a really good story.
Big day.
So we're going to switch to a new topic of leadership tools. And David, we're going to get to you, but not on this one. How can alumni identify the tools and support to build a customized foundation? Terrence, why don't you take it?
When I was thinking about this, one of the things that came to mind was this quote from Eisenhower, the President Eisenhower, and his definition of leadership, which has stuck with me, is that leadership is an art people to do what you want them to do, but because they want to do it. And I think that there are like a couple of parts that I'm going to stick to here. One is the art piece. It is an art. If you listen to the stories people are telling here, there's no formula. And so even with the definition of the word tool, it's not like here's a hammer, there's a nail, and like one just works with the other and you're good to go. It's much more something where you have to figure it out. And one of the things I'll talk about in a little bit is around self-awareness, and that's a part of figuring out that art. The other part I want to stick to is at the end is in getting people to want to do something. When you combine the getting them to do what you want them to do, that can sound manipulative, but what's really, really important is, as I was talking about the Red Robin story, it's about motivation and incentives and understanding how to motivate people and what inspires people. And there's another quote I'll throw out from Charlie Munger. He says, "Show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcomes." I think that's really true. Like, how are you incentivizing your team? How are you helping to inspire your team? So I bring that up because on the art piece, as I mentioned with self-awareness, one of the tools that's important with regard to self-awareness is there are a few of these. So I'll just name one, but there are a few that you can use here. Like there are personality tests that I think can be powerful, and different ones work with different people. So like StrengthsFinder is one of them. I don't know if folks have done StrengthsFinder. I personally am pretty partial to the Enneagram. That's another. But there are a few of them that you can use that help you to understand, like, who am I? What makes me tick? And that self-awareness is really important because in the end, when you show up, it's you that is leading. And if you aren't in control of yourself or not understanding of yourself, then what comes out of your mouth, the way your face looks when you say something, your body language, like it all shows. And so being aware of what are the triggers for you, what are the things that someone might say that takes you back to something in childhood that sets you off, like that's important to know. Because then when you hear that thing, it's like, okay, take the 5 deep breaths, right? And also on the opposite side, like what are the environments that help you to become your full self? So knowing yourself is the first thing. There's a there's a type of leadership called conscious leadership that I fully ascribe to, and there are a number of tools in there that you can use. But that's about the conscious part of that is knowing yourself, understanding who you are as a leader, and just being conscious of the moment, yourself, and where you are. And so that's first what I'd say. Self-awareness is a big part. A second component of it are some more like checks and balances. We're talking about assessment here. So there are practical ways to just to get knowing who you are, to understand in that exact moment, like what's needed. What are frameworks that you can use? What might be helpful for your particular style of leadership? Something that I've grown accustomed to. I'm going to say I made this up. I'm pretty sure I didn't, but I just can't remember where I got it from. So it's mine now. I call it freedom within a framework. That's a way, and I tell all the people that I lead that this is how I operate. I like to give a lot of autonomy, but it's not completely autonomous. Like the framework that we set out is what's the vision that we're trying to achieve, so long term. What are the milestones in between here and now that we plan to hit? What are the tools and systems that we can use? And then what are the values or principles that are guardrails? And if we can all align around those, then like you go and do you. Like how you do it is more, I leave that more up to the person. I will be your guide, but I found myself too many times thinking something like, well, when I did this, 10 years ago, this is the way I would have done it. And that doesn't necessarily work with everybody. And so the how I try and leave to them. But there are many tools that you can pull or bring in for yourself. Mine, the freedom with the framework thing is something that works really well for me. That's like one for me. So that's the second is finding what are the practical things that you can put into place. And the last is around understanding your own support system and putting one in place. And like Ryan was talking about with coaching as one example, like that's an example of a support system. A mentor can be a support system. Having a network of people that you can go to and ask for sounding boards is a support system. Friends could be a support system. But often leadership can feel like you're like on a lonely island, and making sure to break that island down so that you have people around you is critical because you're not gonna know all the answers. Even if you do know the answer, sometimes you can't see the answer because it's like the fish that doesn't know it's swimming in water. Like you sometimes can't see past your own area. So having people to turn to on a regular basis, I think is really healthy. So those are like the three frames to get to that art that I'd say that people should follow. Like find things for self-awareness. And in the 15 minutes, I'm happy to provide more like specific tools, but things to help you become more self-aware, things to guide your day to day, and then having a support system is pretty critical.
Yeah, those are incredibly helpful. Thank you, Terrence. And like he said, if you're in his breakout group, then he'll be elaborating on these further and you can ask more questions. All right. Next question, David, learning from bad leaders. That's not you, but I think you might have some stories about other bad leaders. Have you observed leaders who did not have an intentional leadership foundation? And what were the signals?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, you skipped one on me here. Learning from bad leaders, learning
Yeah.
from leadership setbacks.
Oh, we're going to do bad leaders first. Do you want to do that one?
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
Sorry.
I would say I have been a bad leader. I think it points throughout. Everyone's going to face that, whether you say you're bad or not. Leadership is about learning, and I think that challenge is being open to being a lifelong learner, and even more so now. The speed of change is happening so fast that if you kind of get stuck in a path that you think is going to work forever, or in situations that come up again and again. So I think kind of cognitive biases, success patterns that you've had before. So when I think about bad leaders, I think you immediately go to the skills. You go to, maybe they're not a great communicator or decision maker, or, they're not doing one that stands out if they're not ethical, right? I mean, there's things that you can see in bad leaders that you have to observe. But I think for me, a couple of them is consistency. If you have a leader that's changing with the wind and you can't really get a grasp for where they're coming from, that ambiguity really starts to make the team nervous. You don't feel comfortable, you don't feel confident, you don't really maybe buy into the vision. Everything's a little too loose. So, the leader needs to have the courage and the confidence of that commitment to stay consistent. Now, it doesn't mean you can't alter it, but it will stand out if it's too frequent. So, the leaders that I've observed that stood out immediately for me were those that changed a lot of things too frequently, and they often changed it without feedback. They were kind of a lone wolf, and they were out there just making decisions and moving forward. Sometimes you have to do that in a crisis situation. You have to kind of narrow things down. You don't have time to get input a lot. So, bad leaders are all around us, and we all, I think, look at people that are in leadership roles and make judgments, and we're critical. But I think, as Terrence said, until you're in that seat, the view changes. Like, oh man, I had no idea about how hard this can be. So, it's a lot of it is also, until you know who you are, leadership is everyone's business. And I think that was Ryan, and that was a quote that someone gave me very early in my career. Leadership is everyone's business. And just because you have leadership on the card, the team doesn't elect you the leader, you're never the leader. So the title doesn't mean you're the leader. And that then forces everybody on the team to be a leader, right? So if you kind of have that growth mindset wherever you are on the team, including the leader, and some leaders don't, they kind of have a fixed mindset. There has to be this willingness for everyone to move forward together, to stay together, and to come together. So I've heard of situational leadership, maybe many of you have, but I think it's more than that. Everybody's in situational positions today with the speed of change and adaptability. And I would add, the leaders that I've seen that aren't adaptable, they stay too tied to the successes they've had in the past, or too tied to the way they make decisions, or too they're just fixed in the way they want to do things. All of those things bog down what you're trying to accomplish, and you kind of close off being open-minded. So it comes down to getting a lot of willing to get that feedback, take that feedback, and grow from that feedback, and seek that feedback. So when people aren't intentional about those things, intentional about feedback, intentional about trying to review how they've made decisions, and if it's been consistent, and if it's relating to and aligned with the vision that you have. So um, I think for me the challenge with this is it's really easy to judge, but there are so many things that are going on, for leaders, that sometimes it's just approach a leader and say, have the courage to say, I'm having a problem with this. We're really not on the same page. Can I ask you some questions so that I can better support you on the team? And for most, and I've been in that situation where I didn't do that, and it kept me further away from that leader than I might have been had I had the courage to kind of have that direct converse. So I better understood where I could support that leader and what we were trying to do.
That consistency piece, I think I mean, it seems so simple, but there can be a lot of confusion if somebody isn't consistent. David, I think that was a really good call out. Greg, is there anything that you'd want to add to, in your experience observing leaders who didn't have an intentional foundation? We have a few minutes left on this question, if you'd like.
Yeah, most definitely. So this bad leader issue is a real problem. Wave your hand if you've had a bad or mediocre leader. Anybody on the yeah, I mean, I asked this in tons of groups, and I always get that almost everybody, according to surveys, 1 in 2 people has left a company because of their manager was just a bad manager. It's a big problem. I was working at one of the startups that I worked for, and I would say mixed leader, because this person was brilliant and this had a real bold vision, but also a deep in being. And so a few things that were going on that were really problematic. One was the impulsiveness, and you'll see this with a lot of founders, where it's kind of a new idea every week. And it's like, we got to do this, we got to do that. And I got to tell you, it's just exhausting, and it really just bogs the organization down when you're constantly chasing that, as opposed to being consistently disciplined towards the vision we talked about earlier. There was also an aspect of being overly optimistic and overconfident, and not seeing the potential risks and the downsides. And so that got us into trouble. And then actually, just looking back, there was a real non-inclusive aspect of it. There was a real kind of clubby, where this person really valued like the revenue and the growth side and the sales and the business development, and this person undervalued finance and operations and the kind of, the product development build and that whole side of things, kind of revenue versus cost. And it really caused an imbalance in the organization that got us into trouble. And so I think those are some things. But Terrence said earlier, like this leadership thing, it's hard. It's easy to kind of be in the peanut gallery and cast aspersions, and so what I've come to understand with more humility as I've gotten older is that we all have aspects of bad leadership. We all have leadership derailers and traps. And I actually built a leadership derailers assessment online. It's a tool that has 60 kind of common leadership derailers. And I think one of the things that we need to do better is we need to be aware of where we're good and where we're not so good, and get the kind of help that Terrence was talking about earlier, that David and Ryan were talking about earlier, and rely on others who are stronger in areas where we're weak. And then you have the beauty of that team, that we're more cohesive, and we help each other with some grace, because we're all flawed and we all make mistakes.
Really good points, Greg. Thank you. And kind of along the same lines of bad leaders, maybe it's not because of a bad leader, but maybe everybody has experienced some kind of setback, whether it was in a leadership role or towards those stepping stones of your next goal. But you can learn from those setbacks, right? So learning from these and setting time to reflect on those setbacks. Ryan, do you want to reflect on a setback you faced in a leadership role and what you learned? And how did the learning influence your leadership path?
I was thinking about it in light of someone was just shared. I mean, I felt so many times. I've been fired a bunch of times. I've like, lots of different setbacks, from which I've learned. Probably maybe an important one. A role that I had was very market share sensitive. So we were the largest player in the space, but that meant everyone was gunning for us. One of our competitors had raised over $1 billion to come after us, and um, they were really gunning hard. And on my anniversary, the one day I told my wife I definitely would not work, they took our single biggest client that morning, and that was pretty devastating, because I had just spent a lot of time with them, and I thought, like, I've got a really good personal bond. I've really fortified this place. Like, it's we're in a good spot. Like, we're good, right? And we weren't, right? So for whatever reason, either I was wrong, or I overestimated my own gravitas, my own relationship, or underestimated the power of someone cutting an $11 million check to someone else. It was a blow for me, and it was humbling for me. And my people were out in the field every single day fighting the same fight, across thousands of fronts, just not with as significant or salient as a player. But it was kind of great, because it'd been pretty easy for me up until then, right? Like, I was in a leadership position where people would like see me on TV, and so if I was calling someone and trying to encourage them to stay with us, to give us another chance, whatever they were upset about, to calm them down, there was a little bit of I don't know, celebrity in a weird sort of corner in the world that was helpful, right? And that allowed me to overestimate my impact. Like, it wasn't really my impact; it was positional impact. And this kind of knocked me out of that and put me back in a place that was much closer to the people I was supporting, my teams, my leaders. It was more akin to what they were dealing with every day. They didn't have that sort of crutch to fall back on. They didn't have that sort of, star power, whatever you want to call it. And that allowed me to think much more clearly about what they needed, to be much more humble in my support of them, to listen much more closely and talk a lot less. So that kind of reversed the approach that I was taking to this fight that we were in. And because they kind of saw me kind of hit as well and kind of wounded in that, maybe I got a little more credibility with them, a little street cred. And that allowed us to together create a strategy to fight back, to go on the offense in a pretty significant way, and really rally, which was awesome. I mean, it worked. It worked because of them, not so much because of me, but I at least lit the spark, and we just crushed it. And really, I mean, we had largest market share gains in history of over 100-year-old company, the highest profitability we ever had, like all the metrics, like tick them off, like every single metric, we absolutely crushed it. And I think if I had been right that my relationship was strong enough with that person to withstand it, we probably would have been on like a gradual death slide, because there wouldn't have been the spark, there wouldn't have been the blow, there wouldn't have been the rally cry, there wouldn't have been all the work that took place to actually like get us to a better place where I understood the challenge better and understood my team better and could support them better. So I relish that. I mean, every leadership story I tell, everything I ever use to help with anybody, it's usually a story of failure. Maybe it's followed by success, but it's usually starts with failure and not always followed by success. The learnings are much more poignant. I wish I learned more from success. I'd probably be more successful, but I learned a lot from getting my butt kicked.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. One of the many things in our culture model here at Greenhouse is always forward. So that is definitely applicable here, Ryan. David, Jamie's proud of me for saying that. David, what would you add to this? Do you have any share or stories you'd want to share about a setback?
Yeah, well, there's many, but I'm going to go early in my career, just coming out of school, very technical, finance degrees, accounting degrees, going into investments, wanting to be analytical and, analyze stocks and write stock reports and research reports and all those kinds of things. And I think, in that, those technical skills served me very well. And then I became a financial advisor and used those skills and was going to become a CFA again, kind of following that path of leaning on the technical skills. And, but I was doing things differently at the time. So I'm a little bit older. So, this is back in the 80s. And also think about the leadership style back then, especially on Walter Street. A good leader yelled and screamed at you. That was kind of what was going on at the time. It was none of kind of what we're used to today. And they rewarded you for those technical skills. They rewarded you for the right answers. And this to me is where the Peter Principle comes in, because in a lot of organizations, you get promoted to a leadership role without any leadership experience. They'll take high performers that are technical good or great salespeople that are always hitting their goals or whatever it is, right? And you get moved up into that next step. And they put you there without even, again, starting leadership training or preparing you for that role. You kind of learn by the seat of your pants. And that happened to me. I went from those first two roles to head of advanced training and development for what today is JP Morgan. And it was because of my technical skills and leaned on those and got in that role. And you've got that success in those reference points and what you were paid bonuses for all of that. And it was reinforced, right? So you've got this pattern of being reinforced for being strong at something. And that's usually the business of the business, not the business of people. You're strong at something that can be measured, and you get moved along, and then boom, you go up into that next role. And I begin to do that role the same way. Hey, it worked in the past, it's going to work in the future. And, it was a focus on things other than you're in a leadership role, other than the people. And you start to see the impact of what you're doing by not having that awareness and how it's beginning to harm, either your team or the environment or things like that. And sooner or later, you're going to get feedback whether you want it or not, right? Somebody's going to start to shift and say, okay, we're glad you got here, but you've got to develop, you've got to change. You cannot continue to lean on these types of things. So, my experience was just moving through my career and kind of moving into positions I wasn't ready for, and then had to, kind of take that feedback of, these things were great, they're important, but that's not what we need from you today. And like Ryan said, it's the hard lessons, and it can be the Peter Principle, but that can happen a lot throughout our careers. Every time we take a transition and move into a new role, we're in something different than what we were rewarded for to get to where we are. And we've got to have that awareness to slow down, I think, and self-reflect. So transitions for me became very important after that, and the awareness of going in very differently to have a different kind of impact in the organizations and in the role that I was in.
Yeah, these stories are just reinforcing the importance of that intentional foundation, right? And the tools that Terrence was mentioning of making sure you're always checking in with your support group and the tools that are in that pack. A couple more minutes. Greg, would you like to reflect on a setback that you faced?
Yeah. So I was involved with a scale up startup. And at the beginning, we had a theory about which business lines would take off. But we were just guessing. And I happened to be leading the one that took off and ended up being 90% of the company's revenues. And we were very growth oriented. We were growing very fast. And we're doing some things well. And I was leading the team both on the school development side and then on the school management side once we got contracts approved. And the school development went very well, and it was instrumental. So I had great people, and I was fortunate, but put a lot of time into hiring good people. But the school management side was kind of secondary and didn't get enough attention, and I was not doing a good enough job on that side, especially as we grew. And I think I fell into the trap of being too busy and reactive, flying around doing deals, and our focus was on growth, growth, growth. And so I was getting that kind of support from certain aspects. But in my heart of heart, I knew that I wasn't doing enough on the management side that was well enough, and it was going to get us into trouble. And I wasn't asking for help, and I wasn't being honest enough to say, what does the organization need, and what am I giving, and what's my capacity? No, I was out of business school. I was young. People reporting to me who were many decades older and stuff. And so at some point, I was kind of getting out of my depth in that area, but not recognizing it. And eventually, they came in and they split that, and they said, you know what, this is really two different functions. And so you're going to lead the school development. We're going to bring in somebody who's got a lot of experience. And I was very supportive, and I helped the transition. But that was something it was longer than it should have been, because I should have been the one asking for help and bringing in more resources and calling, waving a yellow flag. But I didn't. It was a miss on my part, and part of ego was in there, and again, just being too busy, just active and doing. And so that was a miss. Ended up working out okay. They made a good decision, and we had a good partnership between us, so we're able to kind of move forward. But there was some damage done, I think, in the meantime. So real setback and lesson learned the hard way.
Lesson learned the hard way,
Yeah.
but a lot of lessons in the lesson. All right. Well, thank you. That's the end of the panel discussion. I'm sure alumni, you might have some questions that you want to follow up on. Save those if you can for your breakout groups. And if you do have questions for somebody that you're not in a breakout group with, then you can put it in the chat, or we can connect you after the event. Well, we do have some amazing takeaways and themes that I'll send in an email as well, but just some to call out now that that we pulled away were realistic leadership when it comes from thinking about learning from setbacks. Leadership isn't about grand ambitions. It can be about small, consistent actions. Adapting to different people. Effective leadership requires understanding individual motivations and adjusting approaches accordingly. Being intentional. Different leadership styles exist, and leading effectively requires self-awareness and adaptability. Conscious leadership. Being intentional and aware of your actions, mindset, and environment. Self-trust and growth mindset. Leaders don't need to have all the answers immediately. Confidence in learning and adapting is key. Effective leadership, consider all areas and perspectives, avoiding favoritism or blind spots. And always forward.